Hi, everybody. Welcome to The Walker. I'm Mark Owens, design director here, and I'm just very pleased to welcome you to this, our third Insights design lecture of 2024. I particularly want to thank all of you for coming out on a snowy day and making it here. Here at the top of these lectures and the beginning of every talk, this is the moment when we pause to acknowledge that the Walker Art Center is located on the contemporary, traditional, and ancestral homelands of the Dakota people. Situated on what was once an expanse of marshland and meadow, this site holds meaning for Dakota, Ojibwe, and indigenous people from other nations who still live in the community today. As a cultural organization, the Walker works towards building relationships with Native communities through artistic and educational programs, curatorial and community partnerships, and the presentation of new work. For those who are new to the program, the Insights Design Lecture Series has been running since 1986, if you can believe it. All of the talks since 2005 are archived on the Walker website. We also have a YouTube channel, which I encourage you to check out. As Emily mentioned, Insights is a long-running partnership with AIGA Minnesota, and I want to thank them for their continued collaboration, as well as Shapco, who always donate the printing of the poster. So please grab a poster before you leave tonight if you don't already have one. The images for this year's Insights Identity were sourced from the Minneapolis Public Library Picture Collection at the Downtown Central Branch and by our own Brian Huddleston. And it was very fun sourcing images of collaboration from Material Archive. So in the spirit of this year's theme of collaboration, I do want to acknowledge that this is a hugely important collaborative endeavor. I want to thank my design team at the Walker Design Studio, our colleagues in marketing and content and communications, as well as our Walker event production team, who really make this all run very smoothly. And of course, Josette and Al, who are providing our ASL interpretations tonight. So I want to thank all my colleagues. Before I introduce Mitch, I also want to highlight our upcoming final Insights program, which is next Tuesday, April 2nd. Members of the Twin Cities Zine Fest, which is celebrating its 20th year, will be here to talk about independent publishing, and I encourage you all to come back for that, and also to join us up in the lobby after the talk tonight for reception and more informal conversation. Tonight, I'm thrilled to welcome Mitch Paone of DS Studio to the Walker. But before we start, I thought it might be worth reflecting a little bit on how much our modes of attention and ways of taking in information have changed in what, in practical terms, is actually quite a short period of time. The FCC introduced high-definition television in 2004, which is now 20 years ago. But its widespread acceptance was not immediate. YouTube followed soon after, 2005, and the iPhone was introduced in 2007. But we had to wait until 2010 for Instagram to arrive, and stories were not introduced until 2016. Thinking about this recent history, it's hard to believe that nearly every television commercial made before 2004 was likely shot on 16mm film and bounced down to a standard definition digibeta tape or 720 by 540 pixel movie file. Today, we are used to seeing moving, high-definition images on screens of all kinds, in the city, in our homes, and in our pockets. In just 2 decades, what the theorist Jacques Rancière has called the distribution of the sensible has been completely reorganized. And of course, businesses and brands have had to follow suit. Founded in New York in 2008 by creative director Mitch Paone and managing partner Meg Donohoe, DIA have been central to the recent rethinking of brand and identity through the lens of motion. And I think it is no coincidence that their professional lives have mapped pretty directly onto the period of transition that I just traced. Mitch cut his teeth in the early MoGraph scene in New York, where he first met Meg, who was freelancing in project and account management. Over our anecdote, we realized that we both had a brief period sort of overlapping at Brand New School, which had offices in LA and New York. In 2012, Dia recalibrated, focusing on typography and animation, and they soon began to be recognized for their expansive, kinetic typographic environments and work for brands. Recent years have seen close collaborations with the likes of Nike, Adidas, Squarespace, MailChimp, and Pinterest. Through their work, typography, with a capital T, and motion have been repositioned from an ancillary part of a brand system to the very heart of brand and identity design. So it's customary at this point in an introduction like this to list the speaker's various accomplishments. But when I was writing it down in words, it still seemed kind of incredible. So raised in Kansas City and educated in New Orleans, Mitch Paone is a trained jazz pianist who spent his formative years studying design, snowboarding, and playing in nightclubs. While working in New York, he lived in a rent-controlled apartment in Little Italy on a commercial lease around the corner from artists like Tom Sachs and Terry Richardson. And in his spare time, he jammed and learned type design from legendary brand designer Matteo Bologna. After 16 years in the city, an impromptu teaching gig at ECAL brought Mitch to Switzerland. And the COVID pandemic kept him nearby, with teaching appointments in the Netherlands and Geneva, where he served as a lecturer at the Geneva School of Art and Design. Since 2018, he has also operated Monkey Type, a foundry offering custom and retail typefaces of his own design. And in 2019, he was inducted into the prestigious Alliance Graphique Internationale, the AGI. Most recently, he and Meg have relocated to the small town of Chamonix at the foot of the French Alps, and from which they run their mostly remote studio of 4. It's a very small studio for building generative tools and motion systems for some of the world's biggest brands. So from one snow-covered landscape to another, please join me in welcoming Mitch Paone to the Walker stage. Thanks.
Well, I appreciate that introduction. I have to warn you, it is almost 2 a.m. my time in France, so bear with me. But I think I'll get my adrenaline going a little bit. So yeah, I'm actually Midwestern, if you can tell by my accent. I live in France now. But so the topic about this Insights lecture is about collaboration. And for me, thinking about that it can sort of manifest itself in sort of a billion different ways. But I think first and foremost, while it is just a studio of 4, I mean, without Meg, the studio wouldn't exist. She's my wife and business partner. Launched it in 2009. Just in case you guys want to follow some stuff. Dog pics. I'm also a wine nerd, all this stuff, teaching, whatever. But in the sense of collaboration, the work that we've done has been the help of just a monstrous list of people over the years, freelancers, mentors, all sorts of professionals, all sorts of friends that really make the work what it is. And I think that's specific to our studio is that while we do create things, the 4 of us, but the fact that we're really receptive in bringing people from the exterior and professionals in very specific trades to elevate the work beyond, I think what we could do internally. And that's actually something that I learned really, I think, centrally within learning music and playing music and ensembles. And before I get into that, I'll talk a bit about music, but I'm a composer and a pianist. So say if I have a song that I have to bring to the band, I have an idea, I have a track, I have a chart, but how those other musicians interpret it are going to be much different than what I had in my mind. And 99% more interesting, better, and elevates the work to a place that I could never imagine. So for me, it's about finding that sense of space and comfort for all these people that you work with to be able to make the creative work as best as possible. So it becomes really about the art of collaboration at the end of the day. So yeah, I'm just going to dive into this. I have a lot of stuff to get into. So here's me and Meg. She's doesn't like being on stage, so just throw me on the front. But she really is the true, I think, boss and the leader of the company and has an amazing foresight and vision of where the company's going. My joke is that I'm the lawnmower and she just puts me in the direction and just I mow stuff down, and that's just how it goes. So just gonna get into this. So that was a little brief clip of Wayne Shorter's quartet. That's Wayne Shorter on saxophone, Danilo Perez on piano, you have John Patitucci on bass, and then Brian Blade on drums. And I show that specific piece because if you pay attention to the musicians as they perform, there's a loss of self-consciousness in their playing. They've committed completely and fully to that point of creating art in that moment. And that's improvising. I was joking earlier, I kind of have an idea what I'm going to talk about tonight. I know what the slides are, but there's no script here. I'm just going to run with it. And that sense of just being in the flow and being able to perform without self-consciousness is a really important thing for me and to think creatively within the studio. So the way we look at this is input, output. For those of you who are coders or do any creative coding or any scripting, there's obviously input and output. You do something, you get a result. But so improvisation for me creatively falls right in the middle of that. My whole life experience, my training, everything that has formed me as a human being allows me to make that decision creatively in the moment, in that period of time, and nothing's stopping me from that. And then, if I'm recording a record or making a poster or doing some piece of design, then I can take a break and then look at the reflection results. But for me, there has to be a clear separation between the two, because if I'm being critical, if I'm thinking about results, or if I'm trying to reflect on the work while I'm doing it, then it falls apart. I have old teacher used to say analysis leads to paralysis. So you have to find that flow in the creativity. And really, as a musician and a pianist, that improvisational spirit is central to what we do at the studio. So I'm going to talk a bit about the input, a little bit at the output. I'm just going to get into this without, you have to get to know me a little bit to understand where I'm coming from. So this is the team: Computer Boy, Marge, DigiD, MP, and Layla Beans. And that's what we call each other. Computer Boy actually has a Computer Boy tattoo on his ankle that was drawn by DigiD. Surprising, we have maybe an HR nightmare in a typical agency, but, we've been together I think this group's been together for almost 10 years. So both Daniel and Deanna came directly out of internships and stayed with us ever since. And Layla's been with us the whole time as well. So that's at the top of the Guida Midi in Chamonix on a company trip. We flew them out here. And so that's the landscape that I live in now. Gives you a little sense of that. So a little different, same kind of intensity. There's Chamonix, there's New York. That's where the base is. We were based in New York. We had an office in Soho for, 7, 8 years, moved to Brooklyn, and then ended up in a landscape that also towers over the top of me. And I think maybe there's some comfort I find in feeling very insignificant. Piano first. I started playing piano when I was super young. This is me playing a recital. Got into design by looking at skateboard, snowboard magazines, really into it. Coincidentally, you have David Carson, Neville Brody, specific designers at that time, really playing with typography and layout. And I was really, really kind of taken by this when I was super young, maybe 15 or 16 years old. And then right around the same time, also playing music, I heard this record from Herbie Hancock called Thrust. This specific song, Butterfly, I was like, this is what I want to do. Like, I can literally repaint that room, that picture, that space I was when I heard this song. And I was like, Mom and Dad, who is the person I can learn jazz from in Kansas City? I want to take lessons from them. And so then that was kind of like a mission, I know what I want to do for my life. This is going to be really central to that. But on top of that, take a look at this artwork. You have this amazing illustration, amazing typography. this is all happening within the vernacular of music. And then through the music of Herbie Hancock, I discovered the life and career of Wayne Shorter, who I sort of see as sort of a spiritual guru, introduced me to sort of Buddhist philosophy, all kinds of different stuff. And I think with Wayne, this idea that there's this constant trajectory of learning the whole span of a lifetime, and not as you see it as like, I become a creative director, then I just make PDFs and decks and talk to clients. Like, no, there's always something new and fresh to learn to elevate the craft and the art that you're working in. And he, to me, is the prime example of that. I think he won the Grammy of the Year when he was like in his early 80s. So his whole career was really just pushing the limit of what he could do from an artistic standpoint. So coming from music, coming from jazz, the typographic history within jazz covers is quite fascinating. And there's two specific record labels. You have Blue Note, which I think has got an American tinge. It's fun, it's funky. And for those that are familiar with ECM, this is like the German cool, So it's like fun to compare the two. You're like, yeah, this is going to be a party, listen to this record. You're like, I think I'm going to have a highbrow experience when I see this stuff. So, and then, all I just have to prove that I do play piano. We talked about bringing one here. This is me actually playing. I was doing a workshop in Moscow, and they like tricked me. They're like, Mitch, we're going to a club later. And I was actually really hungover, and they're like, no, you gotta go up and play. So this is me playing a Wayne Shorter track with a random group of session musicians in Moscow that night. So anyway, and a little more jamming too, but I can get through this. And so this is me composing, developing, just practicing, playing and certain stuff. But anyway, let's move forward. So this concept of identity, if we think about graphic design, visual identity, it's a mixture of elements, typography, colors, animation, whatever it's going to be. But I think if we look at identity as a sense of a holistic point of view, almost like evolution in a way, you see this zebra, it's kind of a strange thing. You have this animal with, stripes. It only lives in this very specific part of Africa that's part of this evolutionary chain, but it's the elements, the surrounding, all of it, the nature, all of it really ends up creating this specific creature in a very specific way. And I find that fascinating, that looking at all of the influences around something that can create something what it is. And more importantly, not only how it looks, but how it moves is very key within that too. So I think for us, as a design studio, this idea of movement, kinetic identity, creates the actual thing itself, where while I could wear my black sweatshirt, my boots and jeans, obviously I'm Mitch, but I also walk like Mitch too. So if someone sees me walking, knows me well, and they see me walking, kind of like waddle like this, it looks like I'm like super happy all the time, which is generally correct. That's Mitch's walk. Before they can see me, they know it's me by how I move. So I start to break that down. Why is that the case? So if you think about, physics, you have the laws of nature, we have gravity, we have all kinds of stuff, friction, we have, bounciness, all these different things that we just take for granted. We know how these things move. We understand this is very just based in nature. And then these are things that we can think about, then just directly apply within a graphic design context. And this really became a way of research and development within the earlier parts of our studio, say 2015, 2016. What's interesting about that is that all of this is based on physics and trigonometry. All can be essentially coded or animated and developed. So it's a fun thing. It's like, what if you have marbles going into a bowl, but exchange the marble and put text, put them together, then you have that. What if you just dump a bunch of type in something, just change out whether it's like a thing of nuts or something, but type on it instead. So it's really just taking typography and merging it within these elements. And that became really a way to see how we can interact with nature within a typographic, very minimal way within graphic design. And this is us just playing around. So it really kind of continues to stack on itself. Biomechanical systems, we think about the rigid structure of my body. I have my bones, my limitations, but I also have a lot of flexibility within what I can do. So this is a looping piece from Edward Muybridge. It's like, I think, the first sort of looping sequence. So you see the dynamism of the horse, you see this sort of looping animation, but also when you take it back and look at the actual static imagery, the dynamic imagery, it's captured in time. This kind of unresolved feeling of movement's always sort of captured. And that's what I found really fascinating, thinking about, wow, if we just stop motion and hold pause, then you can build and create compositions that you wouldn't be able to do from a manual sense. And then, back to coding, back to animation, all these things really can be broken down into sort of technical aspects. And I think, looking at this stuff, these sequences, I find, quite pleasing to look at, because you see the flexibility there, but you see the system within it. And I think that's similar, or maybe comes out of my jazz understanding, that you have, say, a music chart that really tells you what the song's going to be, but there's a flexibility in how it can be sort of expressed. So it's always sort of playing with this strict thing, but also stretching it to make it interesting. And I think also for those of you typographers or type designers, just looking at patterns, looking at systems really can kind of inspire a really interesting way of thinking of an approach to design. So, for example, caterpillar legs go like this. What happens if I take the same gesture and apply that to typography? Quite simply just tracking something in and out. But I think what's important here is not just simply just animating something. There's like a gesture and elegance on how things move in nature when you look at things like that give it a little extra interest, a little extra sensitivity. And I think that's what I find fascinating, really looking in these references and sort of applying that within a design context. So just keeps adding on to this, thinking about my music background. It's interesting because if anybody's studied music theory, typically music's in 4/4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4. If I emphasize specific beats, specific parts of that sequence, the body feels it differently. So, for example, this is 1, 2, 3, 4. Feels like I'm going on a march, So let's switch it up. Let's put it on the 2 and 4. Start feeling a bounce. Just because I'm emphasizing 2 and 4 the body, I'm gonna have a little more fun when I listen to this song. And this is also a joke in New Orleans. You can't clap on the 1 and 3. You're not hip if you clap on the 1 and 3. But if you clap on the 2 and 4, you're cool. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Not 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. You see, just me if emphasizing something changes my body reaction to it. And I think that sensitivity of how the body reacts to stuff becomes really fascinating when we think about all sort of creative endeavors. So, for example, a waltz. 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3, 1. You get this kind of sweeping feel. And then you get Radiohead. You start to mix up. 2, 3, 4, 5. 2, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2. And then Pink Floyd, 7/4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4. So what I find this is interesting is that just the augmentation of thinking about time, it's still just me doing that. By emphasizing that, I have a different relationship to my body, to how it feels. And it gets cooler and more interesting when you start to augment and change that or break the grid. For those of you who are familiar with New Orleans music, just offsetting it slightly. It's not quite a swing, it's not quite straight, but it starts to make you wobble. So for those of you who've been to New Orleans, the city is usually pretty much drunk half the time. So the music has that vibe. And there's a cultural relationship to this that I could talk about forever, but that's not the point of the discussion. And then you have somebody who everybody's a hip hop fan. Jay Dilla deliberately is offsetting the sequence of time to create really, really dynamic rhythmic structures. So this is really essentially, from a design term, just breaking the grid, but knowing the grid, but breaking it to create something that's going to be impactful, a little different, a little bit outside the box. And I find this really fascinating to think about, as a designer as well. So really, essentially, we're looking at time, we're subdividing time, we're creating grids to develop a time. If anybody creates beats or creates music, electronic music, we know this. You just take, a bar of 4, duplicate it, or a bar of 3 and duplicate it, and then you can build stuff on top of that. So thinking about that from a choreographical standpoint, there's no better example than the Jabberwocky.
Show me what you got. Hey, 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 show me what you got.
So what I'm getting at is that we have so much to play with within this structure, For that, I can do all kinds of dance moves. I can play with this. I can choreograph with it from a music standpoint or a choreographic standpoint. But thinking about this, how this could potentially impact how I approach design or animation or film really does sort of become interesting. So one other thing I was talking about, improvisation, being in the moment, being in the time, performing, being super focused, as you saw the Jabberwockies and their performance. When you have this level of performance and development, I can hit pause and find beauty in the composition no matter what, because the performance and concentration is always there. So this interplay between static and moving becomes really related. So there's a lot of artists and designers that play with over their sort of careers. So a piece by John DeCesare, just looking at a Bach piece and trying to develop sort of an artistic sort of system out of that. Looking at, choreographic notation for ballet, I think is Rudolph von the Bahn's a good example. Like really finding, what this sort of relationship and structure of the body is and what you can do, creating sort of a language of developing dance. And I find, if I'm a typographer or a designer, I see this system here, this visual system is very active, and that is still related to my relationship with body. If William Forsythe does a lot of stuff like this too, there's just tons of stuff. I just love this idea of time being captured and moving and going back and forth. And even like more naive pieces like this, there's just some unresolved tension within the work that I find quite fascinating. That can't be done in any other way. It needs to be captured. So, quite simply, just like I was doing earlier, just take typography, a choreography, and fuse it. So you have a b-boy doing some hip-hop dance, putting some type on the head, the hands, and the feet, and now you have like a promotional piece for like a lecture or something else. So it's really just this interplay of just music composition, choreography, and graphic design elements coming together. So now when you look at everything you do, just think that I'm basically just creating beats with type, animation, graphic design elements, and developing it from there. That's essentially the fundamental approach of how we look at work and create work. And it's just endless. So, and if you notice, typically just playing with the typographic component, sort of like lack for a better reference, a Swiss understanding of typography brought into this very kind of unique dynamic space has been really, I think, the focus of, what our studio does. So you see how it moves, but also what's fascinating is that I can create things that I couldn't do from a manual sense. We create a poster, we set up a grid, we put the elements in there, but we're starting to develop essentially a generative system that can build sort of a very graphic illustration like this, for example. And that's just like the MyBridge piece. It's like this little moment in time, to me, is the most dynamic, most interesting thing. Let's just take that, capture it, and send it to print. So the process starts here, goes here, and ends here, which as graphic designers, it's really kind of a confusing thing. It's like, how the hell did the print thing become the last sort of piece of component? But if we develop a system that is dynamic, essentially I call it like the gateway drug into generative design. If I have a 1 second piece, I have 30 frames, I have 30 frames of variation. I can pick one of those 30 frames to then decide if I want to print it or not. And so that essentially formulates sort of the basis of a lot of the work that I'm going to show you in a bit. So, like what Mark said, we're essentially getting here. Anybody who's a big Minority Report fan? I am. So the mode of communication, the way it evolves, the technology, how it evolves, has pretty much been the impact of how typography and graphic design has sort of evolved over the years. Printing press gets developed, and this happens. This gets developed, and we have to react to these things. So as designers, we have to react to the technology and how to communicate in it. And so that, in parallel to the study of thinking about music and the integration design, the integration of what we're doing within a technological aspect started to be prototyped in things like this. So like, for example, these are just prototypes done in like 2017, 2018. I'm like, so if nothing is a format anymore, then everything's a format for graphic design. My face can be one. My phone can do that. A dumpster can also be typographic. And what's funny is like this is real now. Like that was done within 3D software to do the thing on my face. Now we can just do that in Instagram. So this is speculative research essentially happening in the studio. My dog's face is not safe. Nothing's safe. It's like, oh my God, I can track type on everything. But again, there's still a sensitivity to think about how typography works without the bounds. And I think that's one hard thing to think about. You know, when I study typography, Mueller-Brockman, we have to understand the format, we have to understand the scale, but now we're in basically like Apple Vision. So how does it work now? So we're just trying to solve these problems within the technical aspects of what we can do. So leads me to another point. I'm going to parallel music. So this idea of creating instruments for creativity. We're stuck with Maxon, Cinema 4D, After Effects, Adobe, things like that. You kind of hit a ceiling of what you can do. And the same thing with music, if you think about this over time. So the tools need to evolve for the creativity to evolve. So if I think about a piano, started as an organ in the 1500s, maybe even earlier, that eventually the harpsichord was invented. Harpsichords pluck strings, so you can't play loud or soft, it's the same tone. Piano was invented because I want to be more expressive, I want to put more dynamics within the musicality of what I'm doing. And then we're starting to get into the anything goes. Here's Herbie Hancock with a billion synthesizers. Still the keys are there. And then Jay Dilla, for example, just with some hardware and MPC, just hitting buttons. For me, creating music that is just as impactful as a piece of Mozart or Bach. Now, I'm saying that as a trained musician. It took me a while to say, oh, I can just use a computer and make something that is just as powerful as, say, a classical piece. But now I really, truly believe that we don't necessarily need to have a technical training and instrument to create impactful, powerful music. And that's a really interesting thing and a big discussion I think that's worth having. So what happened was, okay, the software didn't allow us to do things we wanted to do, so then we had to just create the things to do it of what we wanted to do. Here's a little processing, I think Open Framework Sketch, I think 5 or 6 years ago. I tried to write code, I'm terrible at it, but at least I understand the fundamentals of it, so then I can work with developers to do some stuff. And here's 2 little projects where this is really sort of taken to the maximum, where we actually just developed software for the actual project. So the limitation here is black and white typography. And then what I have input copy that I can change, font size, repetitions, different sort of parameters. And then I can customize aspect ratios and generate these pieces really in the matter of seconds. So for those of you who are familiar with After Effects or Cinema 4D, you can do these things in that software, but it would take hours, processing power of your computer, where something like this creates an incredible amount of efficiency within the, what you can do creatively. And really the consistency there is just black and white, Helvetica Now. And that way everything kind of has a similar feel, but also is very radically different. So here's some exports from that. Like this render took 10 seconds. So yeah, it took a little while to develop the software, but like I know I could probably do this in After Effects, but I think my computer would probably just melt. But that's what's fascinating. So now it's just like the piano that was created after the harpsichord. Now these things allow us to do more interesting things because then we can move faster, move quicker, try new things, and we have to develop the tools to be able to like push that even further. And we're kind of in that space now where Adobe is behind, there's other software being developed, but I think bringing programming and developing custom software is becoming central to a design practice because, we need to be able to anticipate the future and the communication it's going to live in. And then here's another one. This is for SMXL. This is like a kind of a tech company because, it's like tech companies that you don't know what they do. It's like, I'm not really sure. But we're playing with the idea of exponential SMXL, typographic thing. We can do all kinds of stuff. I can map video in there. I can, map my face into it, generate all these different random compositions. But the consistency is just the color and the text being mapped in there. So then you're able to really generate a lot of dynamic assets in a very quick way, in a variety of different formats. And these things are really interesting, but there's no other way I'd be able to create this, or I could do it, but it would just take a long time. So the efficiency is insane and also allows this creativity. It really gives you a whole other level of possibilities. So there's this other thing, which is a bit slower. Instruments in font form. Talk about monkey type briefly. And so, we have all these tools, we have all this technology, we have all these, things that we can do to make crazy stuff, whether it's tracking stuff in the face. But as a graphic designer, there's a sensibility of history that needs to be really integrated and really it needs to be in your bones to be able to have educated taste decisions in creating work. And for me, I'm going to pause that for a second. For me, it was really going down to the path of drawing typefaces. I can't shortcut that. I have to train my eye optically to be able to understand the form through tradition, through handwriting, through calligraphy, and really just practice and practice and practice and practice and practice. So, it took me maybe 5 or 6 years to get to a point where I could even use a font that I designed. And even then, I still look at it and I'm like, it looks like shit. It's like you look at the S or lowercase a, it never looks right. You think it looks good today, you come back next week, no, there's something to tweak. So this is actually a preview of our website that's going to be launched hopefully in 2 weeks.
On Monday morning, I got up late. There was Mr. Monkey outside me gate. Don't know what to say.
So right now, I think there's 12 typefaces in the catalog. Not going to be fully released on the site. I think in 2 weeks. By the end of the year, there'll be maybe 12 or 13 typefaces available that have been developed over the last 5 or 6 years or even longer. So this is just a little taste. And as you can say, having a bit of fun with it. So monkey type. So here's just a preview of some of the typefaces that are both completed or in progress. I'm just going to zoom through this. A whole variety of stuff. And what's interesting, and people talk to me about this, they're like, Mitch, type design is actually quite rational and historical in comparison to, I think, a lot of the work that comes to your studio. And I think the reason being is what I found through animation and doing stuff within a lot of technological aspects, the stuff that worked best was typographic material that was drawn with like the best quality as possible. For example, there's this type designer we've collaborated with named Francois Rappo. He lives in the mountains in Switzerland. Just all he does is draw fonts and ride his fancy bike. But like whenever we use this typeface, it's drawn so well that I can destroy it with these kind of generative tools, but it always still feels good because that quality of craftsmanship is there, marrying it with something that's experimental or progressive. So I'm just going to blast through this. A lot of fonts. I could get into all these and talk about them, but I think you guys get the idea. And also finally getting some serifs in the catalog too. Super excited about this one. Kind of a new take on Waldom / Dido. So yeah. But I think for me, drawing typefaces gives me the ability to see compositions at this micro level that it really informs your handling of things. You understand space in a way that I wouldn't be able to do otherwise going through this sort of this kind of hard, kind of classic sort of training. And so that really helps that marriage between sort of the experimental side of the work with this sort of classical training of type design and typography. And those things are really the fusion of them is what I find becomes quite fascinating. So yeah, there you go. Last one. And then what's cool You have your own typefaces that you can do fun stuff with, no rules, just for the hell of it. These aren't for client stuff. It's just like, hey, I want to learn a new thing in 3D or a new piece of software or a piece of code. And then you have your whole catalog of fonts that you've designed that you can integrate back in your work. And I think my time living in Switzerland was kind of impactful here, because the Swiss tradition, people would just design a typeface for a poster. So I was like, that seems like a lot of work. You just pick one. But in Switzerland, no, you have to design your own fonts to then make a poster with it. So basically the point was, well, maybe I can do that too. Rather than making posters, I can do some crazy stuff with it within the technical stuff. So for the output, this is just all of the madness I just showed with you. And then this is what happens.
Here.
A lot of stuff in there. Thank you. And again, that first list that I showed you, that so many people were involved in those projects. So it's, again, there's a lot of hands involved in the stuff that you're seeing. So there's two projects I'm going to talk about specifically that are kind of my favorites, and I think partially because they encapsulate kind of the full breadth of what the studio is capable of doing, and also allowed us the freedom to be experimental and push things kind of out of my comfort zone and out of our comfort zone. And I was talking to Mark about that dinner, and even a little earlier, is that's the most fun place to be, is when you could potentially fail. And I think these two projects, especially the second one I'm going to share with you, embody that sort of spirit of the unknown. Oh my God, I could fuck this up and my career could be ending, but that tension and excitement's there. But once you get used to something and you can replicate it, to me it gets boring. I have ADHD. I know the formula, so it doesn't become as fun. So Viral, this is the Biennale Internationale de Design Graphique Français. This is in 2000, whatever. My French is falling apart right now because it's 2 a.m. And so we were invited to the visual identity for the Biennale, and this is over COVID actually. So thinking, okay, what's viral? Very straightforward, viral images and viral dissemination. And for those, if you're familiar with our work, I think we like to play with really direct, really clear, simple conceptual material, like obvious. Okay, these are two obvious things. Let's just figure out what we can do here. So, and then on top of it, there's a typographic element. So you have viral typography. We're like, maybe we're not going to go that. So let's like, what could we riff as like a highbrow viral typography? Look at Weingart, for example. Kind of similar in the attitude, but a little more refined. So this sort of kicked off the exercise. We needed to start developing a typographic system that we knew we were going to play with. So it's just, and it's interesting, you're going to see like iteration after iteration after iteration. And within the design work that we do, this is what we do. You shouldn't spend more than 30 seconds to 1 minute composing a composition like this. Get it over with, do one, do another one. And I like this idea, especially when I was teaching. Get this person on your shoulder saying, what if, what if, what if? What if you do this? What if you make it bigger? What if you make it smaller? Save as. Every single time that what if, save as. What if you do this? Save as. And so then if you go to that process, then you're just like, you know, thousands of things can happen quickly. And that to me is that improvisational flow within a design practice, just like me improvising on piano. Funny enough, this is where we ended. You'll see that it expands beyond that, but we're like, this has got the right amount of wrong amount of right, caps, lowercase sizes, kind of tension. It's just, but yeah, just, well, it feels weird. All right, so got that sorted. So then we're going to start playing with what viral meant within an image standpoint. So Computer Boy, very specifically, this is his mastery of just doing weird stuff with computers. He was like, I got this. We're going to start playing with images. And I said, wouldn't it be interesting if we play with viral images, but within this kind of textual space, you don't even know what the content is. So eventually what we did, we were able to license some, yeah, I like that. It's actually, I didn't even realize that Daniel put the middle finger to the Trump Tower in there. I didn't know that until this presentation. Oops. But yeah, so we these were the images that we licensed, and then we kind of put some Easter eggs. Like there's me on a Ferris wheel. There's me doing like this dance. I don't know. So this becomes the content for the actual virus of viral images. So this idea of viral sort of taking over the typography. So essentially, it's like a viral on viral virus of type and image. So what we did is develop a tool within After Effects, and then I could generate these compositions, and this is kind of it in action, that allowed us to then create these really kind of radical compositions out of this. So you can see viral sort of spelling in and out of this, but it's really interesting when you get closely, you see like Yoda looking at you. And this is like the avatar. It's like, it's so funny because I was like, yeah, that's it. You know, they're like, and I remember the director, he was like, this is perfect. And I'm like, are you sure? That's just so satisfying. It's like, and I think that was kind of the beauty of this project, is because you're like, what am I looking at? But then you go closer and you're like, whoa, that's the content that it serves. It kind of draws you in, and you realize it's just completely absurd. But what's beautiful about this is that the system's flexible. We were able to then take in, you know, posters from the Biennale, take out the viral images, put it back in, and then we were able to create these really, really, really beautiful compositions and kaleidoscopic compositions out of the actual system that we built. So these are just selections pulled, just like I was talking about earlier, like the MyBridge thing, or we were just like, this one's cool, let's print that one. Oh, this one's cool, let's print that one. And so no poster is the same. They're in different formats. I mean, we had to do repetition of it, but there's all these different layouts and different formats we had to do with. So we just decided, okay, this is a composition for the A4. This is a composition for the large scale one. So all of them have a different arrangement, and it's based on how the animation tracks and how the type works together with the images. So we would just kind of export 7 or 8 of them, throw up on a wall, and then we just like, I think that's the one. And then we would send it to print. So that whole behavior as a designer, when I first figured that out, I think in 2016, 2017, during a project A-Track, where, wait a minute, I can just print the export from the animation and then be done and just leave it. That made me feel real uncomfortable because I'm used to crafting and making sure it's ever perfect. But I think the beauty is that by not doing it allows for this like dynamism that comes through the composition that you cannot do otherwise. So like, for example, I can literally just pause this anywhere, anytime, and it works, functions. So this was super fun, had all kinds of different stuff to do. And then the difficult part was, how do we translate this within an edition for a catalog? Can't quite just generate compositions for like heavy typesetting. So we worked with a good friend of ours, Jillian Cashin. She's a editorial designer, graphic designer based in Zurich. And the idea is like, can you capture the same essence of the visual identity within this environment? And boy, did she do a hell of a job. I have to like, when I see, this is like my most satisfying piece of this, because even the captions, if I run through the book, they move like animation. There's nothing set in the same space. So it actually feels like the animation itself. I wish I had a copy of it to share. But even here, like the tension of the scale between, you know, where you're dealing with your, the different typographics, like relationship and hierarchy, I was just like, shit, this is crazy and really, really technical, but also has the uneasiness of the actual work itself that was in the visual identity. And what's fascinating, if anybody's been to Chaumont, which is unlikely because it's a very weird town in France, I'm not kidding you. When we drove out of town after the Biennale, like an old guy like was running out the street with like a machete. It's a weird part of France. It's like northeast France. It's like, it's not the, you know, we think of France as being very, you know, like majestic, but it's weird that this is the center of graphic design in France, is in this town. So every 2 years it gets taken over by European hipsters and crazy posters where like the local town are like, what on earth is happening in our town? So it's funny to see like this huge poster in that kind of contrast and context of this little village. So here's just some examples of some collateral, kind of went all out. Here's the actual book. And yeah, so that was viral. Really, I mean, I love the kind of nonchalant, kind of naive attitude and irreverence of it, but also this kind of craftsmanship that really is intensely built into the project as well. So I think I would ever be sick of talking of this project, but I always have to. It's almost 6 years old. I think I would call it 7 because it took us about 15 months to do. So let me just factor that into the time. About 2017 early, a good friend of mine, Nessim Higson, and then the chief creative officer, David Lee, approached us just kind of, hey, you guys are doing some interesting stuff. Can we just chat? And that was it. So we come in, share some work, have a discussion, and they're like, oh yeah, I think, you know, we need to like figure out our visual identity or branding. We have different layouts. We have great marketing. We have Keanu Reeves on motorcycles, and we have John Malkovich doing weird stuff, but like our design's not happening. And for me, it was like, well, it's a typographic problem because you guys are using Gotham in weird ways and you guys need to get rid of that font. It was like, we just need to change typeface. It's like, duh, you know, but of course I didn't say that. That's what was going on in my mind when I went to the office. It's like, you guys got to get your type game up. So in American corporate fashion, I'm just going to kick this off. This is how you get meetings started in this kind of environment. So basically selling a strategy in like a 30-second piece, all about being New York, all about being tech, all about being fashion forward in a New York sense, like Alexander Wang and whatnot. And it's funny because the creative team of Squarespace is wearing like basically all black, $800 sneakers, like the vibe is there. And I was like, well, let's just convert that into the design system. So this is just getting that team hyped. And then obviously Squarespace, pretty fun name to play with. So that we'll get into it later. So getting into strategy, we talked about design. They got them. They had this other kind of, they didn't really have a design system, actually. It was just kind of ad hoc kind of advertising. Everything was an individual piece. We looked at what modernism meant in New York. So what that means is modernism that's highly funded. So, you know, looking at like the Seagram building and all these kind of fascinating places with marble and Mies van der Rohe stuff in there. And then also that was the essence that we want to capture. If you go to the Squarespace office, I'll show you some photos of it, is very well funded and beautiful. And then also the typographic system in New York is pretty iconic with Massimo Vignelli, and the subway system, kind of like a hodgepodge of Helvetica and sometimes accidents kind of sneaks in there by accident. And then this is the dress code at Squarespace's creative team. And this is their office in Tribeca. So it was fascinating. I mean, Meg and I walked in the office and I was like, you guys have your brand figured out in your architecture. You have it already figured out in your dress code. I mean, but you don't have it figured out in your communications. It's pretty straightforward. So we worked with Francois Rappeau, again, the Swiss man in the mountains, by himself, lives in this 1930s futurist modernist house that he, those of you who type design, like you revive a font, he like revived his home to the original 1930s style, and it's actually become a monument in Switzerland. When he passes away, it's going to become a museum. But you think about it, living in 1930 isn't 2024, so it's like small and awkward, and it's sized for people of that time. So, but that was his thing. He revived his own house. So he revives typefaces. He's got his own Helvetica version called Antique Legacy, which to me is the best one. If you want Helvetica to find, go to Optimo. Antique Legacy is the one. So worked with him. This is the first draft that he brought back 2 weeks after the brief. So the brief was basically the video I showed, New York fashion, New York tech, and then some nod to the New York typography. And that's the answer. When you give it to somebody at this level of craft, I was like, I'm not really sure how I'm going to be able to share this to the client because it looks like he just had it done. And then also, reviewing typefaces like this, I'm like, I can't tell the difference between the versions because they're so minute, but actually they're massive variation in there. Once you start to train your eye and see things, like you can see the G has a little nick on the second one, the other one's curved off. There's all this like subtle detail within the typography he was trying to build to add this kind of techie quality to it, but not in an overt way. And I think this is the typeface. And I think that what's beautiful with working somebody like this was finding something that felt truly classic, but at a closer glance is quite unique and quite specific. And for me, that's sort of built to last and stand the test of time. I'm still using this typeface. The visual identity is exactly what it was when we launched it back in 2018. Nothing's really changed. And ultimately, I give all that credit to the typeface that was drawn. And so got that sorted. And so we were just like, okay, Squarespace, what are we doing? Okay, we make squares with type, Okay, we figured it out. But like, oh, this is kind of interesting. Squarespace, what can we do with this? Well, it turns out we can do a lot with that. And so this is what this iterative process is. When I was showing you the viral piece of the posters one after another, so we really work in After Effects as like graphic designers. So we're just in there animating and designing at the same time, just creating renders, just doing stuff. We don't know what it is. We're just making stuff and testing these things. And then we share this with David and the team there. And he's like, I don't know what this is, but it's cool. Keep going. And that's what I mean about this project. This is like really in the unknown. I go to a client meeting and you share this. So like, this is pretty rad, but like, what is it? Where is this going to be? I was like, don't worry, we'll figure it out. So then this back and forth, I talk about going back from static, going back from moving image, playing with this combination of when you're going to have to be in these sort of atmospheres and what you can do. So, it's just us just playing around, having a good time. But what's nice about that, then you build a huge library of experimentation that then you can go back and reduce into stuff that's more practical, and then work that within different sort of modes of communication, whether it's print, posters, interactive, and so on and so forth. So what happens is we reduce that experimentation into sort of a practical space. We define sort of 6 behaviors / containing systems that we were going to then apply on how the work was going to move. So you have something like you can frame this. You have this crazy 3D cube thing in the middle that we use. You can go in and out of images. You can do slideshows. You can do compositions. So this became a basis of developing the actual system itself. And then simultaneously, we finished the core set of Clarkson, the typeface, which now has been expanded to even more weights. So And we really just wanted to make sure it was just medium being the front runner. We needed to have some lighter weights for specific practical reasons. And then also a cut for the UI to make sure the rendering within the UI and the application was really crisp and perfect. So this is just taking that system of typography, isometric camera, the Squarespace idea, and developing a narrative piece out of this. And this is the introductory film of when we launched the brand identity back in 2018. And on top of that, so this piece was, the music was composed by Joe Johnson, who's a high school friend of mine who actually grew up in Kansas City with me. And it was a funny story. I was giving a lecture or a workshop in Zurich. We're going back and forth the track. He's like, Mitch, I think I got it, but I can't figure out the bass line. I was in Zurich and I hummed the bass line. I was like, dun, dun, bo, bo, do, 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 bo, 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 bo. He was like, that's it. And so then he came back with the next track, just dropped the bass line on, boom. Then you had sort of the brand, the track to define the audio side of the brand that he developed with that. And that's the beauty of collaboration there. You know, you're running into roadblocks and you have somebody that you really trust and have comfort with that you can share, like, I don't know what to do here, please help me. And I'm like, I'm busy right now, but I think I got an idea, see what you think, and then it works out. And I think that's just, it's really cool when that comes to life. So there's a bunch of stuff. When we launched the brand, the huge posters within this is a lobby. It's crazy. I feel like this is like a high-end hotel. It's wild. I mean, that's what I mean. The lobby already was branded correctly. It just needed the other stuff. And then just a lot of different social media assets. And you can see it starts to stretch out of that Squarespace idea, but the typography is still consistent and then allows sort of the visual identity to full through because that typography is going to be very present through all the assets. And I particularly really like looking at this stuff like this, the back end, the UI, again, the typeface, the rendering of the typeface, and how that works within these very minute cases is where the brand is still speaking, but in a very passive, very fundamental, functional way, but you still feel that essence brought through the type design itself. And to top it off, and we talk about generative tools a little bit earlier, we created a suite of generative tools that we shared with the development team and the design team at Squarespace, where then we could basically automate layouts, generate layouts without essentially having the typography to be broken. And this is something I find really fascinating, is to develop these tools for brands, because people just need to generate assets and get it out. They don't need to try to reinvent the wheel when you have a system built. So these were all done in JavaScript, and then the Squarespace team is a huge development team, and then they integrated this within their brand platform. So a couple years after that, they went public on the New York Stock Exchange and gave us the opportunity to take over a ton of media space in New York. And I will take a bet that this might be the most radical typography you'll see in the New York Stock Exchange trading floor. And it was funny, I was watching CNBC, Anthony Castellano, the CEO, he was talking about it, and like, the shit was like so distracting in the background, but I was like, yes, this is super fun. Just to be able to like, I mean, as a designer, like, I'm just blowing type up at a scale that's like massive. And it's like, to me, like, no way would I ever be able to do that in my career. When you see this, I'm like, holy shit, I'm really just destroying type over massive screens. And that was a very fulfilling moment to be able to like convince a client to do that. But again, it didn't really have to take convincing because it's all part of the system. It was a Squarespace idea, so naturally it was supposed to look like that anyway. So there was no question if it was too radical or not. So getting kind of close to the end, talk about this idea of kinetic identity. For us, it's the concepts that relate to the passage of time. It's been clear that I've illustrated that rhythm and music composition, these things are integral to how we look at how animation is developed, how we even create compositions that comes out of that, and then visual systems created or amplified by the means of animation behaviors or computation. As you can see, animation itself could be essentially a generative tool to create stuff, and then that actually allows you to build tools and develop tools and prototype for tools that go way beyond something you can do in After Effects or Cinema 4D or typical software. This is the way I was taught in school. This is the way I think now. Anything's a way in. I mean, I think, you know, like I showed you, like you had like the track thing with like the b-boy dancing. That's a way in. Just put type on that. Doesn't need to be done out of a strict tradition or a canon of European design or something. There's no rules except for typography. Let's take a step back. You got to learn the rules of typography before we break them. So I had moved to Europe. I was in Switzerland first. My understanding of cheese is about as good as my typographic skills now. And then I did a brief stint in the Netherlands, also teaching in The Hague. And so what I'm doing in the academic environment is trying to create a very, very free and open space to work with students to understand that it isn't just about the form, it isn't just about the design, it's about our whole physical experience with work and how that can marry and build stuff. So you have form, sound can generate form can generate sound, just like reading music. I know how that speaks. And so really thinking about developing languages by all this coming together. And so here's an example of
So for me, it sounds
exercise.
and movement will be like.
So what's happening there, student draws something, he has to dance it and then make the sound, like on the spot. So, and then someone makes a sound, I have to draw it, then I have to dance it. Or I make a dance, someone has to draw it, someone has to make the sound. And there's no wrong or right, but it's this instantaneous reaction. What does this feel like? What do you do? And that kind of structure really starts to tap into this intuitive sense of how you feel and how you react and interpret things creatively. And it also has an extremely therapeutic effect on the students because they're completely out of their comfort zone. They're having their student class look at them feeling like idiots, but that getting through that kind of layer, that barrier of stress really kind of opens up the class and opens up this sort of freedom and idea of, you know, what they can do. So did a couple other workshops. This is Master's Type Design, crazy, just using screens, thinking of typeface specimens. A little more experimental stuff about this input-output, thinking about how we can create a generative system to do stuff. Someone did like Portuguese tiles, created a generative system to make tiles. This kind of psychedelic thing. Someone created wearables out of a generative idea. So it was all about this. I have this system, it goes through something and the output. So there was no control over the final thing. The system eventually had to create that actual thing itself. And here's some other examples of some cool stuff that they were doing. And then finally, this is probably my favorite workshop that I've ever done. It was that first exercise that I showed you, done over a week, where I had a group of students have to develop essentially a language where they could communicate with those three pillars. So if I have a form, I knew how to perform to that, or I knew how to sing to that. If I made a sound, I knew how to move to it. I knew how to make a drawing out of that, and really finding them to develop a language where they could communicate. And the idea was to really kind of find emotions that you could translate within the context. So you can see it got pretty out there. It's like a performative art exhibition, probably at the Walker would be kind of similar to this. But it was, to me, one of the most, fulfilling teaching weeks, just to see how the students interpreted this exercise and really just let themselves free. But then also really fundamentally understood how a system and a language worked, and how that could create something. And it's on top of it, these are all improvised. So they knew the system, and then let's go, start your performance. It's not rehearsed. They just know what to do when they're reacting to each other, just like I'm playing in a jazz band, essentially. So there's a few little quotes, just because I got to end with a little, uplifting, maybe cheesy things. So in the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but the experts, there are few. This is Senru Suzuki, and The Beginner's Mind is a book that's really been impactful for me of like Zen practice. And that is similar to what I talk about Wayne Shorter, this thought of there's always something new. Being yourself in an uncomfortable position, putting yourself in the space of learning is going to force you to learn new things. This is my piano teacher. This is a really cool quote to have when you're 16. When applied to piano, it's safe. It's not a mistake. Play for conviction. I was like, yeah, I set the house on fire, but I meant it. Yeah, it's a little different in that context. And I'm as been in Minneapolis. So Dinan Katagiri was the founding abbot of the Minnesota Zen Meditation Center. It was actually sort of the first books that I read on Zen meditation and Zen Buddhism. And spiritual security means you are fully alive and comfortable in your life as it is without expecting anything. And Wayne Shorter, resistance is what an airplane needs to take off. So if you think about that, I mean, and this is a good example is we've all tried to learn new software or do something. We go on YouTube. It's like, man, I suck at After Effects. Get on the YouTube thing. And then and then you have this uncomfortableness of like not knowing it. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, this is giving me new ideas. Like I've like learned something new. And also another thing I think is funny, you know, we all sing Happy Birthday. And then there's the person that really sings it. And you're kind of envious of them and pissed at them at the same time because they make you feel guilty for not singing loud. But there's that's that resistance of yourself not allowing you to go full in. And so when you break through that, then it can take off. So for me, if I'm in the zone, in the creative flow, all these things, I'm not being critical, I'm not comparing, I'm not expecting, I'm not scared of anything. This just vanishes once I've committed to that flow, that state of improvisation. And for me, it's easy to say, because I've been playing jazz all my life, that feels the best. That's like when I feel the most happy is when I'm there in that flow, whether it's making posters every 30 seconds or running a jazz solo. That's the stuff, you know, and finding the space where you can be comfortable to do that is to me the ultimate thing beyond making beautiful work is finding that space for yourself. So to finish the lecture, I'm going to leave it to Wayne Shorter because I can't do any better than he can.
The intent now is to throw away, kind of put away everything that was learned, the studied stuff. Again, I always refer, because Miles is the only one that would talk like this. He'd say, Wayne, he said, hey, Wayne, do you ever feel like you want to play, he said, you want to play like you don't know how to play? And then he said, do you feel like you'd like to play music that doesn't sound like music? That doesn't sound, I know it's familiar. And I have a tape of Charlie Parker giving a lesson, and the student says, Mr. Parker, I have to learn all these scales, I have to memorize all these scales? And Bird said, yes, and after you finish learning them, forget them.
Right. Play as if you don't know all of that stuff, or you're not playing a scale, but you're playing straight from the heart.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Thank you very much. Way past my bedtime. All right.
Thanks so much, and thanks everybody for being here. This is the part of the evening where I launch a softball question to get you all relaxed, and then we like turn it over to the audience. So I only do like one or two softballs, and then we go straight to you guys, because I think you all made a special effort to be here. So we've had some amazing conversations, and it's kind of hard to summarize them, but I often think about the designer in relationship to something like the producer, right? So, you have a songwriter who's written a song, but like it doesn't really take on its full form until you hire this person whose agency is somewhat nebulous, right? Like, what is Quincy Jones really doing in there? But the producer sort of gives it a form, or can say, I hear horns on this, like, let's get some horns on this. And so maybe there's another musical layer there that's this sort of more amorphous designerly kind of agency, which I think is something I'm interested in your work and sort of the way you think about things. And then I think from a more practical standpoint, which is something we've also talked about, is sort of client as collaborator or client as improviser, and finding those spaces where the client can trust you a little bit to sort of get out on that edge, because we often feel, client as a point of resistance or trying to be convinced, and sort of that moment when you can find a client sort of come on board. So, pick and choose one of those nebulous ideas, then we'll turn it over.
So I think there's two things. Obviously, the producer to me is essentially creative director also. And I think my role in the studio, while I do have a lot of technical skills and I'm involved in the trenches on the actual creation of the work, there is an element of this isn't feeling right, this feels right, this doesn't feel right, this doesn't feel right, I don't know why, keep trying, keep pushing, keep going. And then and we talk about this, like, what does taste mean? And it's hard to define, but there's something that makes something feel just right. And I was talking about even Zach Kaiser's work that he just did. I was like, this guy always just looks really amazing, and I don't know what it is. But that's like the producer. That's why Quincy Jones, Rick Rubin, they have this sensibility of some sublime aesthetic that they're able to identify when they see something or feel something or hear something. And that's creative direction role. And I think the second part of it, the sort of practical side, I'm kind of forgetting the question already.
It's like bringing those clients along
yes.
for the improvisational ride.
So this is the beauty of the beauty. I think this is actually one of the most beautiful things about this kind of work and I've talked about a little bit that, what we do is actually kind of absurd and ridiculous at the end of the day. And when you embody the fact that, I'm just making a poster and putting some stuff on a screen, it's really not that big of a deal. This is going to create like a huge wreck or political issue. Then you can push things way further because you're not afraid of it being safe. So for us, there's no safe direction. It's like, okay, we've worked up to the deadline. Let's just pick a few directions that we find are interesting and share with the client and just see how it goes. But also, we have clients, I think, especially like Squarespace or a lot of the larger clients tend to be the easiest because they have large creative teams that work internally. They know the mechanics of the company. So they can see what we did and then see the practicality of where it may live, and then actually ends up guiding where the work lands. So I think reducing an attachment to a direction that you think you love or hate, like I'm just not attached to anything that it's going to change. I know it's going to change, but just knowing that you've got to that point to share work that you feel good enough, even if it evolves from the client's feedback, you went radical with it. It could move, but I'm not going to be disappointed if it gets adjusted. And I think that if you're very happy of all the stuff you're putting forward and sharing, then it becomes more satisfied. And I think we've been through that. Like, oh, they picked the direction I didn't like. Well, let's not even think about liking or disliking the work. It probably will change. So if we're just neutral on it and then we feel comfortable enough that this is what we do, then there is not that like frustration of, client versus me or that. And I think obviously not all clients are created equally. Like Squarespace, different. That's like a very anomaly of a situation. But I think that detachment of what we do and knowing that it's absurd that I get paid to do what I just showed you. It's absolutely absurd. And that's great. That's so fun that we get to be graphic designers and get to do this for a career and make a living off of it.
I mean, it is really encouraging because we sort of think of these big brands as being like so static and foreboding. And we're at an interesting moment where I think, things are changing so dynamically that those risks are like, there's a kind of risk reward calculus, right? Mm-hmm. So taking that risk can sometimes be very much worth it for a client. I want to turn it directly over to the audience and give people plenty of time to talk to you because we're so happy you made the trip. And so mics are going around, and if you have a question, just raise your hand and speak into the mic so we can capture the questions.
No questions. One person's got to break the ice.
Hi. I was wondering, you're talking about your own custom software and kind of the future of design and how we're going to be moving forward and maybe possibly away from kind of what's traditional design, Adobe, etc. I was wondering, do you have any opinions on AI and how that fits into the future of custom software?
Huge. I mean, I've showed a few pieces on there where we developed a processing script within like an hour and a half just using ChatGPT. So it's a collaborative tool. It just like collaboration with people, we're going to collaborate with AI. AI doesn't make the taste, doesn't make the decisions. They aren't the Rick Rubins, the Quincy Jones. We are at the end of the day. And so I'm not afraid of it in the terms of the creativity of humanity. I am afraid of it in the replacement of production and labor. But we have it and we have to deal with it. Just like some of the automated tools that we've created for clients, that essentially replaces a huge department of a company, which has impact on, you know, the political and the, you know, the nature of the company from a financial standpoint. But we can't fight that because it's, you know, it's a beast that's moving too fast. So as designers, we have to embrace technology and find a way to relate to it and collaborate with it to help advance what we can potentially do. And I whether I'm critical or not, I think that you just got to jump on the train. And I think it's going to have a tremendous impact on what we do. And it is a bit scary to think about what could be in the next 10 to 15 years. But if you don't use ChatGPT or Gemini, or just dip your hands in there, it's super fun for typesetting. I was just telling you this, like all this. So like, give me a list of 10 Italian names, all caps. Then I can copy and paste it, put it in the text. Or give me you could just like do little tasks that are annoying to do, and just have it do that stuff first, and then you can push it. Like maybe try to coach it to develop some code or something like that. But I think it's important. We don't need masters at it, but I think it's important to interact with AI and see what can help sort of push ourselves creatively, and then, you know, help us even take what we can do further, because we don't need to rely on other people to do some specific things. So yeah, it is a difficult and challenging subject, but yeah.
We talked a little bit, backstage. It's like design is one of these disciplines where like technology is always changing underneath design, right? You know, people learned Flash and then that went away, and people learned, metal typesetting and then that went away. And, it's constantly new software, new platforms, new ways of communicating. And so you also focus a lot of energy on like your taste, which is more nebulous, but like those core skills like form, composition, stay curious, like be a sponge, be like, have your antenna up, and like those durable things that we learn as designers sort of stay above the technological change, which of course we all also have to engage with always and skill and reskill over long careers.
And I think this is tricky now because we're like inundated with like TikTok and Instagram and references, but having historical understanding of the traditions of our line of work is fundamental in how we make a decision now creatively, what typefaces we use. I mean, if you understand the history of type design, that you know that it evokes a certain point of time in history that's going to tell a certain story aesthetically. Without that knowledge, then we lose something. And so we can't make a really articulate decision without that historical understanding of things. So maybe that's the future. We just know our stuff so well that we can be Rick Rubin and have AI, but the taste and understanding of history and all the references is what's going to be the ability to make work interesting or powerful at the end of the day. Like Rick Rubin's not a musician. You just hear stuff. This is rap, You got a question?
I just thought it was very interesting, but I think about like the sphere in Las Vegas and the concept of being able to do it over more of because everything's very 2D the way that you're looking at it, but yet it's moving. And just wondering if you guys had been working with anything on that.
Spheres are really difficult with type. I mean, I don't know if anybody does 3D. It's like HDR maps are just like spheres of like mapped things. You still have to deal with type in a linear way, so you're gonna have to manage it somehow or find the space of legibility. But yeah, it's always like a typographic problem that hasn't been solved in like Mueller Brockman's book is a new problem that we need to figure out. So that's similar to when I was talking about like the Apple Vision. We are in a sphere. So what do we lock up text to? That's why you saw it on dumpsters or my face or the dog, because at least there's a point of reference where we can stick it. So, I mean, presents a fun problem. But no answers on spherical typography yet, but
Over there. Oh, we got one up.
Thanks for the talk. So you seem to do a lot of different things. How do you consider yourself a generalist? And I suppose ADHD aside, you seem to be a jack of all trades, master of everything. Probably.
That's very nice. So here's the thing. There is an important, I think this is central to collaboration right here. My ability of learning these crafts, so type design, for example, or animation or 3D or code or whatever that is, I have a ceiling and I know where my limits are. When I get to work with somebody like Francois Rappo, I can speak his language, I can talk type design with him, I can talk type history with him, but I can't do what he does. So what is beautiful is that I can create a brief and discussion with him where he knows very clearly where the outcomes should be and allows him to articulate what he needs to do based on my knowledge and actually empathy and just pure respect and reverence for that individual. And that goes for anybody I collaborate with, whether it's an animator, an illustrator, type designer, 3D artist. I know enough to have the conversation, and I think that knowledge gives two things. The communication is easy. So composers too. Working with a composer, I could talk about composing with Joe, but he's way better than me. But also there's an empathetic shoe. I know how hard your job is. I've gone through the tensions and learned it, and I have a lot of respect. And without that empathy, it makes it difficult to collaborate. But when I know I've been in your shoes and it's really hard, I'm going to give you the space and freedom to do what you need to do in that situation. So for me, maybe jack of all trades, masters of stuff, but not quite. I give myself like a B- on everything I know. And that's all I need, because then it allows me to hire the A+ person, and then allows the work to sort of elevate to the same thing. Just like recording a record, I get a drummer. I play a little drums. Here's a vibe we're going for. He does something and I'm like, holy shit, that's way cooler than anything I would have imagined when we're doing that. And that's because I've given complete full trust to the other collaborator, because I know enough, but I know to let that person free at the end of the day.
I know we're all keen to go out and socialize, but maybe we should take one more. Someone who has like a burning question.
Burner.
We'll do up there.
Testing. Thank you. This will be a quick one. We talked a lot about music and how you can find rhythm and tempo and things like that in your visual compositions. Does that come into your like ideation process when you're in the studio? Are you listening to like college radio, hyperpop, meditative silence?
Everything.
Yeah.
I mean, right now I'm on like a real bender on like some like garage house. But it could be Weather Report, it could be Miles Davis, it could be Wayne Shorter, it could be Flying Lotus. I mean, I think for the most part, I'm pretty receptive to, like just musical influence. I mean, for me, obviously Herbie Hancock was like the one that got it started. And if you think about Herbie Hancock, it's like Rocket was essentially like hip hop in like 82, like he just touched it all. But I think, it's music definitely has a huge impact. I mean, it always will. And I think all genres have their own place, and I'm not a huge country fan, but some of it's actually not bad. I mean, people can argue with me on that, but yeah, I don't know. I'm pretty open, but I think maybe because I'm in Europe too, they like love raves and stuff. And they're like, hey, do you know who's playing? I'm like, they're all DJs. Like, what are they playing? Oh, it's like, oh yeah, they produce their own music and come spin it. I get this. Or in New York, you go to the Village Vanguard and see like Kurt Rosenwinkel or, you know, these other guys play live music. So maybe it's just a cultural difference and I'm listening to more
We just want to thank you again for joining us. We'll adjourn to the lobby and we can all chat more informally. Thanks so much for coming tonight.
Thank you.